I'm on. Right.
Good morning, Fred.
Morning. Good evening to you,
Thank you. Mathieu
Hello,
is on.
guys.
Hey, Mathieu. Let's see
Matthew.
if Kawa is here.
Hey, Fred.
Hello, hello.
Hey,
How are
Kawe.
you?
Good
Here as
morning,
well.
Kawa. All
Morning,
right,
guys.
great. Before we go into the full introduction, I'm Gab. This is Mathieu, both PMs here at Voodoo. And we have the pleasure to be with Fred and Kawa from Gameworthy, the studio behind City Takeover. So I'll just show my screen so I can introduce the topic, and then I'll let the mic to Gameworthy. All right. Is this sharing?
It is.
Yes.
All right. Fantastic. So we're going to talk about City Takeover. You may have seen this game reach the top charts. I think it's currently in the hundreds, top hundreds iOS US. Definitely an oddball. Incredible KPIs. It's not your typical hyper casual game, but it's definitely one of my personal favorites. So very quickly, we're going to talk about the studio. We'll let Fred and Kawe present themselves, their inspirations too, and then we're going to deep dive into the KPIs of the iterations, talk about the work that was done on the game when it was live, and a few reminders and key learnings. Great. So Kawe, Fred, the mic is yours.
Thanks guys for having us. It's pretty exciting to be part of a live stream. We've been watching it for a while, so it's a lot of fun to be in one. So hey guys, we are a Canadian studio, Vancouver-based video game studio. My name is Cowie. I'm a programmer. I'm the developer at Gameworthy. I quit my job about a year and a half ago, and I've been making a lot of prototypes for Gameworthy, and finally we got City Takeover. So yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. It's my first video virtual meeting webinar. I'm the artist. My name is Fred D. I'm the artist at Gameworthy Studios. I've been in the game industry for over 20 years. I've worked on many different studios and on many different titles. I first worked with Cowie on a mobile studio about 2 years ago, where we made a hit game together. And I joined Gameworthy at the end of last year to make City Takeover, and that's my first game as an independent developer and my second hit game with Cowie. I'm excited to be here and happy to answer all your questions.
All right, great. I see you also mentioned over 30 prototypes. I quickly checked the dashboard. I think there were 17 on our dashboard. So I take it there may be other prototypes in the wild, but again,
yeah.
I'm so happy that City Takeover made it. You want to introduce your inspirations behind this game?
Sure. So when coming up with a new idea for a new prototype, one of the things that came to mind was some of the Flash games, Connect and Conquer style Flash games that I used to play as a kid, and so I got curious to see what kind of Connect and Conquer Flash games were out there in the market today. Well, back in 2020, and they were all very similar still to sort of like the Flash style games that I used to play. So then I figured, what would a 2020 version of that Connect and Conquer game look like today? And then the answer to that was pretty much City Takeover. So we wanted to take those mechanics and trying to simplify them as much as we could, while maintaining some of the the strategy terms to it, and also just revamp graphics and make it more friendly and inviting to more people.
Great. And speaking of which, so you mentioned a few games which are generally either, in terms of themes, they're either in space or they talk about cells, which is sort of a no-no in terms of hyper casual. And I guess that was really helpful for the CPI. All right, here it is, version 1. Dropping the bomb, 52 day 1, 55 minutes, 94 cents, however. And you can suppose that with 94 cents, the stats probably aren't super accurate because you're dealing with, roughly 50 users a day. But again, those are incredible retention metrics and playtime. So we figured we should iterate. The first version is really the core gameplay, 20 levels only looping. We looked at the drop off and people were still sticking around, looping and looping again. So again, what a tight core gameplay. No stacking, so strictly numbers. which didn't really help the CPI, at least for an MVP. You mentioned something about one of those Conquer. How did you call them? Connect and Conquer. That type of gameplay. But
Yeah,
the
that's right.
difference here is that the towers keep growing when they're stale, right? I know that a few games have people you disperse. In this case, you're always stacking and growing, etc.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, if I may just add
Go
to
ahead.
this, is that in some other games, when you make a connection, you're actually using the like the numbers of your nodes, and we thought that mechanic was a little bit punishing, especially because you'd be vulnerable when attacking, so other buildings could connect to yours. So that was like one of the design decisions that we chose not to implement, just to simplify gameplay and make it even more rewarding when just growing your city, right, in that case.
Gotcha. And I guess something I wanted to say about this slide is that, again, it's an MVP, but we couldn't really see what the control was. It was a bit subtle, and that's something that we're going to talk about in a sec. Concept art from Fred. If you want to say a couple words about this.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So based off the V1 results, we felt that the visuals could use some improvement. I'm a big fan of doing concepts and mockups, and I actually encourage everyone to give it a shot. Even if you're just doing rough sketches, it can help improve your workflow. On the sketch on the left, if you can take a look on the leftmost image, that's where I first started mocking up the basic buildings because it was clear to me that they were the most important part of gameplay. And I found inspiration in Lego because Lego is very simple, bright, colorful, and charming. So these are all qualities which I wanted our game to feel lighthearted and fun. So when we were happy with the results of the first buildings, I started placing the buildings in different environments. So if you can take a look at the sketch in the middle, this is where I first started mocking up our first level. And in that, and you can see in the mockup that this is where I started visualizing the gameplay elements, such as connecting lines, the walls, different shapes of buildings, and even the background color. I chose a more complementary color to our starting blue building. And yeah, so when we were happy with that, I started incorporating the rest into different environments and making sure that these gameplay elements stood out from the new environments and that they still took visual priority. So in total, we ended up with 5 worlds in City Takeover: the starting level, the island, the lava, desert, and ice level. Thank you.
Very cool. And it's insane how, when you look at these, it looks pretty much like the game itself. I don't think there were that many huge visual revamps to it. So spot on. Version 2, I just call it prototype. It was mainly CPI work, where we dropped to about 54 cents. The forced or improved onboarding, I think, was key, just to keep the players involved and prevent churn. And most importantly, have them understand the rules when the levels get a little bit more difficult, and if they're not aware that they can cut a line, how the new buildings work, etc., they were going to be lost. Big visual change, as Fred mentioned, is the buildings that have a top, middle, and bottom part, which allows them to stack and destack, which is, stacking one of the biggest trends in 2020. Added player customization as well as currency, and doubled the amounts of levels. So retention got another boost: 59 day 1, 22 day 7, and over an hour playtime on average. At this point, we knew it was mostly going to be a CPI issue, or at least a CPI work. So I'm just going to show a few videos from Kawe. So we're kind of shifting to something a little bit abstract to more storytelling. Keep in mind, this isn't really a puzzle, not really an IO. It's kind of a genre of its own. So we tried different things that had to do with puzzles, that had to do with runners. So the idea of crowds, of showing what the control is, taking numbers out, which is a big learning for puzzle. So you can see from the left, 70, 62, 56, then 52 cents. Also, the art, or at least the ASO, was rather, I would say, not as specific as what you see on the right side. So we knew that we could target users differently and then funnel them into a more, mass market gameplay. So we were still around the 54 40 cents. And then this creative was the winner, around 38, 39 cents. So again, great effort on the animations, the destruction. Tracking finger is super clear. We know what's up. And the small twist on the gameplay is that here we have swarms. So just to have this cool crowd effect versus the gameplay, which is really, axes, lines, and steady movement. Even though it doesn't reflect exactly the gameplay, that's what lowered the CPI. So again, destruction swarms, also that, evolving land that implicates, basically you're conquering, moving forwards, moving back. It's a versus, that's why there's the flags. And then minor tweaks, adjusting the level order and the new environments that Fred mentioned. And that was it for the prototyping phase. This pretty much became the game itself. I'll just jump into the creative work from our team. So I selected a few, but there were many, many, many iterations on this to keep the CPI low. That was our biggest concern for this game. We knew that, we are flexible with KPIs, but when you're starting high, the CPI is going to double when you're going to start scaling. So that's why we doubled down on the effort, even going pretty far from the gameplay. Look at that catch-up creative, the London one, more abstract, more concrete, Coca-Cola cans. There were a lot of different ideas for this one. Also, shout out to Launch Ops, which helped. So I'm thinking of Rafael, Vanessa, who helped a bit with the art too. We tried a bunch of live optimizations. The main one was to up the number of levels to 70 instead of 40. We tried various things, different ad frequencies, different RV placements, saga map, but the game is very close to what it was in December. Minor tweaks. And I guess that is it. Just a few reminders. So as Kyle mentioned, you can benchmark outside hyper casual, look at casual flash games, Nintendo stuff. We do see a lot of games that look like the ones at the top charts, and that's no good for your CPI. Test an MVP. Remember, you're not trying to test a finished product. 20 levels was fine to get insane playtime in day one. So just focus on the core loop, not the content. And a quick one for Youssef that organized this live stream is to check out the Press Start blog. Just type in Press Start Voodoo, and you'll see there's a few articles there, and soon one on City Takeover. And that is it. I'll stop sharing my screen. We can start the Q&A. I'm just going to start with a question for you, Kao and Fred. What would you recommend for a young studio? Any tips, advice?
Sure, I have lots. But I think the most important thing is don't be discouraged by the prototypes that don't make it. Instead, just make sure that you're looking at the prototypes and being objective about them and learning from them, because you see that you get better and better as the more prototypes you make, and eventually you get there. That's my main advice.
Also, looking at your prototypes, I think you tried many, many different types of games. I can't see two games that look alike. There was a naming game around the world. I haven't seen a unoriginal game from your part. So I don't know if that's a tip, but keep it fresh.
Yeah. I always try and be creative, I guess. I think I believe, like, I used to watch you guys for the longest time, and one of the things you guys talked about was about creating trends instead of following them sometimes. So I really liked that, and just coming up with very wacky ideas sometimes could work, right? So yeah.
All right. Matthew, any questions for the studio we have here?
Yeah, first of all, guys, I just wanted to say huge congratulations. This is an awesome game. I played quite a bit, and honestly, even for me, it's become a huge reference whenever I'm working on a puzzle myself. In terms of both, gameplay and monetization features, it's just up there. So huge congratulations. Love the presentation. If you and the tips. Speaking of keeping it fresh, do you guys have any things particular that you do in terms of ideation when you find the stuff? In order to keep it fresh, how do you guys operate? Any specific process?
For myself, sorry, Kyle. Yeah, for myself, I like to draw on familiar things, and so what I like the game to feel is it feels familiar to people, but I like to add a twist so it feels unique yet familiar. So there's a question in the panel in the chat where they're asking about the bear head. And so for me, because this was a city, and had buildings, I was wondering, okay, how do we fit the whole theme together? And so why are these like people coming out of the buildings to attack other buildings? So I think maybe they're office workers, but office workers, it's very familiar, but kind of boring at the same time, the kind of drab. So adding like these animal heads to these characters, it just gave it that little twist and also added a bit of charm and that unique feeling where you kind of feel like, oh, you've kind of seen this before, but not really. So that's my tip.
Great. Kawe, anything?
Sure. What I like to do is I like to come up with a list of a whole bunch of ideas when I have a free time, when I'm not working on a prototype. Then I would just look at these ideas and just start like crossing the ones that are not good. Eventually the good ones will stick, and then that's what I'll pick for the prototypes. But usually it's just me sitting down and just thinking about a whole bunch of different ideas. Funny stuff is that I actually had a Google Doc with about 10 different ideas, and City Takeover was in there, and it was a Google Doc that I hadn't opened in like 6 months. And then when it was time to work on a different prototype, I was going through some documents and I found that sheet, and I was like, wait, this is a cool prototype. I forgot I totally did that. And then we worked from sort of that initial concept.
I'll just take a question from one anonymous attendee, asking about the timeline from the initial idea to the first prototype, and I guess then to a launch. I know the launch phase was quite slow on our end. We just wanted to make sure we had the right CPI for this game. But how long did it take you for the first MVP in let's say, the whole pre-launch phase?
I think it took us about between 2 to 3 weeks for the first build. Usually we try to make a new build every 2 weeks, but we kind of saw some potential with the city, so we wanted to add more levels, and so that might have pushed for 3 weeks for the first anyways. But for the second iteration, I think it was much faster, right? Like maybe just 2 weeks to come up with a whole bunch of more ideas, and Fred made some of the mock-ups, and that really helped just do the art right away.
And quick one from Gru Gadget. What was your first hit, if this is your second? Did you already answer that question?
No.
You want to say that?
It was at yeah.
Go for it.
It was at a different company. It was at Hothead Games, and we made Super Hit Baseball. So Cowie that's the first time I worked with Cowie, and it was a small team. There's only 4 of us. He was a gameplay coder, and I was the only artist on the team. And that game has done well over the years, and it got picked up by a big studio, and it's still doing well. So that's our first hit game.
Cool. Maybe I can take the next one. Question from Homemade Games, who made all those post-launch creatives, Voodoo or the studio? So for the ones that were post-launch, correct me if I'm wrong, Gabriel, but I believe it was Voodoo indeed. So we as you guys may know, once we have made the KPIs and after the studio has made an initial batch of videos with an ever greater CPI, we tend to transition that responsibility to some specialized teams that we have internally that will, follow what's worked best in testing, iterate on that, as well as look at trends that they see online or in the market, and will make videos based on that as well to further reduce your CPI after the launch, or also, make it stick and have it nice and steady throughout the duration of the scale.
Sure. Just to bounce off that before Karen's question, we tried something a little bit different and failed to do so, which was to involve market devs, on week 2 or 3 once we knew we wanted to reduce the CPI. But Cal and Fred beat us to it. And after that, our team takes over the whole creative thing. And they have to, create rushes, make creatives, and then adapt them on different geos and networks and make some playables, etc. I guess a question on, from Karen. So congrats, blah, blah, blah. Secondly, you mentioned you tried over 30 prototypes, maybe even more. My question is, how do you manage failure? Because that is also a critical aspect of the whole workflow, I believe.
Yeah, so it's pretty devastating the first failures you get because you're super excited about a game idea, and but I think it's part of learning that not all your games can become hits or will become hits, but knowing that you're getting better at the prototypes that you make. So if you, yeah, in my opinion, anyways, if you approach with that angle of like knowing that your next prototype is going to be better because you're going to have more experience, you're going to have a better idea, then that really motivates you, or at least really motivated me to keep going. Because yeah, eventually, there's a number for everything, I guess, right? So, however many prototypes it would take for us to get to a hit game, I was willing to do it. So.
And I think we have a stat here. It's after, well, studios who have made more than one hit with us, generally the time span between two hits is under 11 months. And then it depends how much you prototype, of course.
Question from Tom, maybe. So for the first MVP version, on which platform do you test, Android or iOS? So honestly, on this one, I'm good. So now the dashboard supports both platforms, honestly, to test your first proto. I would say go for what you feel the most comfortable with, and what will allow you to essentially have the fastest possible time to testing, right? So if you build fast on Android or faster on iOS, go for it. That being said, so as you may know, guys, so iOS 14.5 is a new reality today, and will change a bit. You might have seen some of that on the dashboard. The time it takes for you to get your results if you run your first campaign on iOS. So as a result, it may be more interesting if you're interested to get your data quicker to move to Android. That being said, iOS is still very much something that's viable, no issue. So whatever you feel most comfortable with, essentially.
I'll take one from Pierre. When you finished the MVP of City Takeover, did you feel that that was something special or like another prototype?
Yeah, I did, because I like to show the games to some of my friends, and I've been showing some of the prototypes for them, and none of them really picked up the game again and kept playing, except with City Takeover. When I showed it to a couple of my friends, they were like, "Oh, this is hard. I don't understand." But they would keep playing the game, right? And like 10 minutes later, they would still be playing it. So I thought, okay, well, this is there's something there, right? So that's sort of how we knew. But yeah.
Cool. What is your ideation process? So how do you filter? How do you generate, fine tune, and filter your ideas?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I just like sometimes I'll be watching a movie and then some ideas will come from that movie, or playing other games, or just being outside. Well, not anymore because of COVID, but when going outside was a thing. But yeah, just like mostly I guess for movies and other games, you just feel inspired. Like you played with some mechanic and you kind of start thinking of different ways of playing around with that mechanic. Um, yeah.
Yeah, Cowie's really good with that. He comes up with really good initial ideas, and sometimes I'll get excited and I'll do a mock-up, and then more ideas will spawn from that. So we start building on. If you can find something small and that you really like, you can start building on that. So sometimes that works.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that. Working with Fred with that stuff, it's really useful, because once we both have an idea that we like, it's very easy for us to communicate and just change things. And Fred creates these mock-ups, and it already adds a visual to the game, and it makes us even more excited about working on a game together. So yeah, I think that's important. If you have an artist that can do this kind of mock-ups, it's very cool to see something early on before you even have a prototype. It just gets you excited, right? Like at least for us, we get really excited about these mock-ups, and we can totally see how the game would look like, and kind of just go from there.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have to think of the whole thing immediately. It's just you build on little thing. maybe your mechanism, you're excited to try a mechanism, and then you find something, and when you add a theme to it, and then it just builds from there.
Maybe one more general. I avoided puzzle hyper casual because of CPI, which is always high, using videos from actual gameplay. When should we try twisted video of gameplay like City Takeover did? Interesting question. So yeah, it is somewhat true that puzzles do get on average higher CPI just because there are experiences that are less relatable, usually with additional layers of abstractions as opposed to a runner where you go forward and so on. And the objective is really clear. That being said, if you need to consider twisting the videos and so on, it probably means that something went wrong in the initial idea. The better puzzles tend to be the ones that look the most obvious directly. Stuff that play on very simple associations, very clear objectives, where actually a frame from the game is not that bad in terms of clarity. So you could probably rethink the idea, your UI, the way you represent things. And if you still think that you've made a decent enough job on that front, and you get great retention KPIs, but your CPI is still lagging a bit behind, this is probably the point where I would consider making ever more twisted videos to sort of showcase things that perhaps are not in the build, but are kind of attractive to the eye. So great engagement KPIs are a must, I think.
Cool. I'll answer a question and then I'll shoot one to Fred and Kawi. Where was it? How do you make the gameplay mechanic very obvious to the ad viewer? I think showing the control, the win, and the lose condition is key. So if it's going to be a drag and drop, you may, or actually I would recommend putting a tracking finger that's very obvious. Same if you're using a draw or a free control. I think that's very important. The other thing is for the win and the lose. In this case, stacking really helped. When you're dealing with values, people might just get confused and skip. The stacking and destacking is something that works really well when you're dealing with fluctuating values. It's what worked for Cube Surfer, for example. Again, it used to be a number up to 10, now it's just blocks up to 10. And I had a more of a, I guess, a tech question for you guys. When starting on a new game idea, do you start with your project from scratch or have certain presets that you import and alter for your needs?
Yeah, so for every prototype we end up creating whatever new scripts or assets we end up creating, we put it into a side side project for us that we use as a base project for all of our games. So for example, when we start a new game, we'll have like a UI system in place, some audio assets, some 3D meshes, things like that. So we try and savage a lot of whatever we can to make it easier to make new prototypes.
And by the way, the music, where does the music come from? It's one of our only games with a full soundtrack.
Yeah, we got it from the asset store. The Unity asset store is a wonderful place. It's hard to find some things, but it's worth when you find what you like.
Maybe another one from the chat. How important is the tutorial of the game for the first CPI test? Or does that only matter once you're tracking retention? Yeah, I don't think it's that important, to be honest, at the first CPI test. Increasingly, CPI is the very first barrier you need to cross before you iterate. So, make your videos, do something that you feel shows very juicy moments of gameplay that is very clear. All the good stuff that Gabriel shared around showing the controls, the win and lose conditions, and so on. If you get decent results off of that, and with your few levels that you've made in the first build, you get a retention that's low but easy to improve, then probably tutorial is the first thing you want to look at. It's always nice to have that lever to know that even though your mechanic is super easy to understand, that you can always optimize your funnel and your user drops in your first levels by making stuff that's super accessible, super easy, introduces mechanics and control schemes.
Cool. I'll take one from Zan. You can answer in the chat. I'm just wondering if it's Zan from Epico. How do you work as a team? Do you work on multiple protos at the same time, or do you work on the same project at once?
Sure. So I think we work together on the same project. I think, Fred and I think it's pretty important for us to communicate the idea and optimize as we go along. But as soon as we start CPI testing a game and waiting a week for the results, we start working on the next one. Yes.
Maybe another one for you guys. Again, kind of techy. How many of your game codes are reusable? Or how do you actually work to make your game code reusable? I don't know if you have any technical tips.
Yeah, sure. I think it's, as a programmer, I think it's important for you to try and write your code, like trying to not tangle your code with logic code with gameplay much. So for example, UI it's a big thing. Early on when I started making the prototypes, I noticed I would spend a lot of time working the UI, and the UI sort of looked similar for all these different prototypes that I made. So I figured, might as well decouple all of that UI code from game code. And now, so when we start a new prototype, we have very little to worry about when it comes to UI, right? So that's just an example, but you can do that with shaders. You can do that with, your game logic. So if you find like you're always completing levels, and then going back to the main menu, you can sort of like have that skeleton in place and then just build on that. And it's okay to just sort of have like a base project, which you can duplicate and then go from there. But keep in mind that whenever you're writing a new prototype, try and decouple as much of that code or as much of the assets as possible, and try and salvage that for your next game.
Right, and just to piggyback off of that, I think it's really interesting what you said about around UI, around shaders, and so on. I know there was a live stream from some of the great members of our team on the optimization side, the art guys, that, by the way, have worked on City Takeover to some extent. Made a live stream recently on some of the quick learnings and tips that you can implement across your prototypes, as well as some resources from Voodoo that would be accessible to reuse around characters, around shaders, all the good practices, as well as some of the technical resources. So go check that out if you have the link.
And also, I think shout out to Sean, I think, who did a lot of heavy lifting on the optimizing Android. I know we had quite a gap. I think it was due to the number of assets or shades on screen, but the delta definitely reduced with time and help from Charles. I'll just open this debate here. Could you please talk about newness and CPI? Totally new means high risk. How do you manage balance? I guess my latest theory, it's recent and feel free to challenge, is that you either want to, bring something new to the assets and the story and use an old, classic gameplay. So good cores generally don't get old. Or you can innovate on the mechanic, which is a bit riskier because I think, we've released quite a few games. And in that case, I would use more standard assets or story, a boy and a girl, a crowd, liquids, etc. If anybody has another theory, Mathieu.
Yeah, agreed with what you're saying. I would add to that like most things in life, it's about risk and reward. The thing is, if you do take that more troublesome and risky road of innovating on the mechanic and coming up with something that's entirely new, chances are you will get a CPI that's much crappier than if you went for something that's close to something that already exists, but twist the story and the assets. But that being said, that's also where the lowest ever CPIs that we've ever seen come from, right? Stuff that looks super new in the first ad is also the stuff that gets you that CPI that's below 10 or below 5 cents, which is an extremely strong indicator that your game's going to do well. It doesn't mean that other games don't do well, but certainly the riskier stuff is also the one that pays the best in terms of number of downloads and how long it sticks in the charts.
And yeah, I guess the final word on that is that if you look at a couple of games at the top 100, so I'm sure you've seen Slice It All, but also Sticky Flip. I mean, this is such an old control. I think it was the birth of hyper casual, or at least Flappy Bird, Flappy Dunk, and few years later, and it's impeccable, both on CPI and retention side. So feel free to look at mechanics that were popular a couple of years ago, and again, make it 3D, make it new, make it provocative, or make it cute.
Yep, it's actually a fantastic creative exercise that I often advise studio to go through. Is play games that are a couple of years old, or even a year or a year and a half, and you will quickly realize that based on what you know now of the market and what you've tested recently as a studio, you should realize fast that some of those games would never have made it if they were launched today. And the interesting exercise is to ask yourself, what could I do to make this work today, right? And sometimes that goes through visuals, sometimes that goes through blending mechanics, adding stacking, for instance, which was a huge thing last year. And then you essentially have a new game, and this is the way that it all came to be.
Cool. I guess we may wrap up soon. Maybe a last question, Mathieu, can you spot one? I'll just out of curiosity, what was your highest CPI ever on a prototype Kawi?
I think it was like $3, $4 around the world. It was
First one.
about first one. It was about a dog in space going around planets eating coins, I think, and avoiding explosives. It was very hard to understand, but I thought it looked cool, and I thought it was going to be a hit game. It was my first one in the hyper casual market, so yeah, definitely
Cool.
come a long way.
Any last words, pieces of advice?
Fred, do you have anything?
Just keep going for it. Don't think of it, if you fail, don't think it's a failure. It's a learning experience. I mean, that's all I can say, I guess, for now.
All right, cool.
I just want
definitely one of the great qualities of the hyper casual studio.
I also
Great.
just wanted to quickly say a huge thank you for Voodoo for making this possible. Really, you guys have been extraordinarily helpful with with all the help you guys gave us. It was super overwhelming for us because we had no idea how much help you could provide. And once we reached that point, we saw potential for publishing, and you guys came in and helped us out, and it was just incredible to see. And so thank you guys so much for that. We really, really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks a lot to Voodoo.
Thanks to you guys. Thanks for waking up at 6 a.m. Means a lot to us. And thanks for the live stream. I thought it was great.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks.
Have a nice day.
Have a good one.
Bye.